Simple Simpson is an episode I really enjoy watching, one of those in the middle seasons that stand out and is worth revisiting. But every time I watch it, I wish it were slightly better. Don't get me wrong, it's good at what it sets out to do. The Simpsons doing an in-universe superhero story is going to be inherently tricky to execute. They can't just give Homer superpowers or expect us to buy him going out there punching out baddies like Batman. We already got our share of that in the arcade game. The character of Pie Man feels like a nice solution to these potential complaints. The general silliness of it feels very true to Homer's character. It's the kind of overly dramatic scheme Homer would attempt. Being able to use Homer's trademark white briefs is an added bonus. This is the kind of costume Homer would actually design. The episode is essentially about the concept of secret identities for superheroes. The old Batman or Superman joke about how no one can seemingly figure the thing out. They get a lot of mileage out of this dynamic. They really get hung up on this fake mystery angle. His secret identity is what creates the conflict in Act 3 with the blackmail. It's not like his family members are getting threatened or anything. The episode is aggressively against having any sort of stakes. They're determined to keep it light and just wink at the audience at how silly it is. I think that's the right decision with this concept. The darkest it gets is when Homer gets shot, when he agrees to stop putting himself in danger. I think the alternate version of this episode would be a variation on Homer Palooza or I, Dobot, where the conflict is Homer's sense of admiration versus his sense of personal safety. It's heartwarming that Homer takes his daughter's advice right here. I just question if they're tying their hands in terms of the plot. They don't get a ton of mileage out of the superhero turned evil concept. Just a couple pranks and then more arch jokes about secret identities. I don't totally buy into the ending either, that they still don't believe Homer. I mean, I get it. I get that this is the point, that they're really that stupid. It's just too much of a nonsense ending for my taste, especially after all the hand-wringing about Homer's obviousness. So it all didn't matter. Okay. My favorite scene is the stuff between Homer and Lisa, about how she knew the whole time and then is led into the pie cave. I love the detail about how she had left her iced tea down there, and then how she contends he isn't mild-mannered, he's often liquored up and rude. And then the fact that Homer just left all of his stuff down there for anyone to see. Makes you really glad that the writers allowed Marge to see through Homer's disguise. She would honestly be the dumbest person in the world to not be able to recognize her husband at this point. I like the Spider-Man visual references, recreating a couple memorable scenes from that movie. They always run a risk when they do modern references from that era, that they won't end up aging well. But these hold up really nicely. We should probably circle around and talk about the beginning stuff. It opens with a reality dating show parody, pretty typical sort of joke from that era. The bitter Simpsons nerd in me is annoyed that they reused the old island or peninsula joke from Lisa on Ice. But it had been 9 seasons since they did it, so I guess some repeats are gonna trickle through. Then we rush through the Farmer Billy and Golden Ticket stuff and go to the county fair. I'm glad this stuff is brief, because it's pretty uninteresting, but I wonder why we couldn't just open the episode here. Make up some excuse for why Homer is randomly judging pigs. I mean, you don't really need the pigs. They're fine, they're pigs. Cletus gets a good line, the 80s pig design is funny. There's nothing like a well-observed pig grooming joke. The song parody fares a bit better, a very cynical take on how opportunistic artists can capitalize off of patriotism. The Simpsons deliberately avoided getting too political during this era, but around 2003 or 2004, you started to see this sentiment expressed on the show more often. Then we go to the place setting competition, which is really where the main story starts. They get a lot of mileage over how over-the-top cruel the rich Texan is right here. Using this character for the scene always struck me as kind of weird, as I'd never really think of him as being particularly mean-spirited by nature. It's still kind of fun, how ridiculously blatant he is about it. It's just a weird role for him. I think the over-the-top mean-spiritedness is important, though, in making the whole thing feel like a farce. Comic Book Guy receives similar treatment, and then they ramp it up even further with Mr. Burns. You get characters like Lenny and Carl openly wondering who out there could save them. This kind of self-aware meta-talk is easily my least favorite thing about modern Simpsons, because they do it all the time. But here, in this silly superhero parody, it works. Go nuts. Overall, I just find Simple Simpson to be silly fun, and that's all it really needs to be. It's not a modern classic or anything, in my opinion, but it's solid and original for this series. I can't think of another episode like it. And even though it's over 12 years old now, this episode still feels relevant in today's pop culture world. Thanks, Marvel. Maybe the secret identity stuff isn't that fresh anymore. I mean, everyone had been making Clark Kent or Bruce Wayne jokes for decades, but they managed to make something that still feels kinda timeless, and managed to do it in universe. Incidentally, this video was supposed to be the lead-in for a Simpsons mystery episode about who really is the superhero Fistface. Because the Milhouse solution never made sense to me, to be quite honest. As we all know, Milhouse was already Fall Out Boy. But in doing the research, the only thing that happened was me getting punched in the mouth by a panel of 10 to 12 physicists. So screw this episode. I'm cooking up 10 to 12 revenge pies instead.